for joining us here in our 23rd Foreign Correspondents Association of the Philippines Forum. Like I said, it's our 23rd episode since we've moved all our forums online. And we are very happy to have two very important speakers at the moment to discuss one very contentious law that's just been passed. Those who are tuning in on Facebook, we'd like to welcome you as well. And those who are with us here in the Zoom forum, I hope you're all well and safe. Now, my name is Chamela, and I am a member of the Foreign Correspondents Association of the Philippines. I'm the president of Focap this year, and I'm also a correspondent of Al Jazeera. So welcome to our Focap forum. I'd like to introduce our first speaker. She's one of Asia's most knowledgeable experts on security and Islamic terrorist movements, particularly in Indonesia, where she's based as head of the Institute for Policy Analysis of Conflict, or IPAC. Her intimate knowledge of Islamic radicalism and separatist and ethnic conflicts in multiple Asian countries allows her audience, including governments, to understand the dynamics and critical linkages that can help prevent violence and so reforms. She has previously worked for Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. We'd like you, everyone, all of us, to welcome Ms. Sydney Jones, currently in Jakarta. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Now, our next speaker is someone that, those who have covered Mindanao is also quite familiar with. He has covered Mindanao for quite some time. He has nearly lost his life while leading his platoon in a gun battle against a much larger swarm of 150 Abu Sayyaf militants in Basilan in 1995 as a young lieutenant just out of the Philippine Military Academy. His Medal of Valor award says, quote, his arm was almost severed. He had to bite his right thumb to keep the arm from falling off. Since June last year, the US-trained general has been leading the AFP's Western Mindanao Command, which has been aiming to decimate the Abu Sayyaf and other Islamic State allied groups in the southern Philippines. Let's all welcome Lieutenant General Cirilito Sobehana from the Western Mindanao Command. Good afternoon,
Thank
sir.
you, Madam Camera, for that very kind introduction. Good afternoon to each and everyone, and I'm happy to see you.
Good afternoon, sir. It's nice to see that you're all well and safe. Just a quick heads up lang to those. We're going to start with presentations from two of our speakers, and after that, we move right away to questions from members of the foreign press. I understand that there are also observers from different embassies. You are allowed to observe and listen, but you are not allowed to ask questions. And when we have time, we will move on to questions from members of the local press. So we'd allow, of course, ladies would go first. So Ms. Sydney Jones, I believe you have a presentation.
Yes, thank you very much. Let's hope this works. Can you see this if I, hold on a sec, if I put it on, can you see it still?
Not yet.
You're not, oh dear. We tried this before and it worked. Hold on a sec. Let's see. Ado. Now I can't get back to my, hold on. Okay, here we are. Can you see anything there?
Not quite, Sydney.
Okay, I may forget. I may forget this then, and just speak. Hang on a sec.
Yeah, it's working now.
Oh, it's working. Okay, great. So what I wanted to do in this brief time is just to very quickly give some of the context for the nature of extremism that links the Philippines with the rest of the region.
Hold on, Sydney. I think we're looking at a different. We're seeing your browser, not your presentation. So maybe you can hover over to your.
Hold on a sec. You are screen sharing. I'm going to stop share and I'm just going to talk.
Okay.
um, let's see. So basically, the Philippines is the regional hotspot, and the Philippines remains the place in the region with the closest links to ISIS. So even though ISIS has lost territory and it shifted to a guerrilla strategy, it still is maintaining its media center. And more than any other country in the region, it's the Philippines that is in close touch and that continues to report almost every incident to oh good, somebody put the screen up. Uh, uh, continues to report almost every incident to the formal ISIS media. Now I'm confused because I've got my presentation has suddenly appeared on my screen.
Yeah, I have a copy of your presentation, Sydney, so I'll help you.
Okay, great. So now shift to the next slide. Okay, this is just an example of an announcement of the killing of 8 soldiers in Patikul that appeared on July 8th on Anaba, the ISIS news bulletin. Next, please. In Indonesia, by contrast, we're seeing mostly small cells. We're not seeing a lot of direct communication with ISIS, and we're seeing still very low-tech operations, such as the stabbing of police very recently in June 2020, both in Kalimantan and in Solo. There were fears that COVID-19 might raise the awareness of pathogens as a biological weapon in the region. But thus far, there's no indication that anyone in the region, in the Philippines, Indonesia, or elsewhere, is thinking in those terms now. Next. Next. Yeah. It's important to remember that the Philippines is the only province of Islamic State in the region. It's not clear how much meaning that still has, but I think it's important to remember that we had 5 components that had taken part in Marawi, and we still have 5 components, maybe 6, still active today. We've got the Sawajaans in Sulu, we've got Faruji and Dama in Basilan, we've got Salahuddin Hassan in North Cotabato, we've got Abu Taraifi in South Cotabato and parts of central Mindanao. We've got the remnants of the Maute group in Lanao del Sur. We've got the remnants of what used to be called AKP, and people are calling the Tokboy group now, still in the Sarangani region. And almost every one of these groups has at least one foreign fighter operating in it. We still have the Sawajaan group being the primary host, but it's not the only one of foreign fighters. Next. I think that one of the things that's important to remember is that while for the last 2 years, the pro-ISIS and the kidnapping factions of Abu Sayyaf have been largely separate, they may be working more closely now because of the funding that's dried up from ISIS Central. At the height of Marawi, the pro-ISIS factions of ASG didn't really need extra money because they had plenty of external sources on their own. But now there may be closer cooperation simply because the pro-ISIS groups need additional funding, and the easiest way to raise that is through kidnapping. Next. We've seen increased cooperation with foreign fighters since 2014. Just wanted to note that there's still controversy about whether Dr. Mahmoud and Amin Bacho are alive or dead, but there are plenty of others, even if it does prove to be the case that both are dead. Wasn't clear how many FTF were involved in Marawi, but there were certainly dozens. Next. The big issue in terms of Indonesian Philippines extremist cooperation are the remnants of the Holo bombers. And as you recall, we had the two husband-wife couple come back from Turkey in 2017. One then go to Mindanao in August 2017. Next. And after the man involved in the bombing got to Sulu in August 2017, this young man, Andi Batso, who was working in Sabah as a undocumented palm oil laborer, arranged the travel of Ruli's family and in the process married Ruli's daughter, Chichi. And as far as we know, Andi Batso and Chichi are still in and around the Patikul area of Holo, and were said to be actively trying to recruit other Indonesians. So Andi Batso is very important to keep track of. It gets confusing because many Filipinos confuse him with Amin Batjo because the names are so similar. But it's Andi Batso alias Zikri, who is the person who is most active in trying to recruit additional foreign fighters for Mindanao. Next. And after the Malaysians arrested the young man working on Andi Batso's plantation in Sabah, who broke open this whole network, we learned that the network that extends into Mindanao also extends into Afghanistan, into the Middle East, and into Trinidad, Venezuela, and the Maldives. So we are dealing with an international network here, and that international network continues to be active. Next. And the final thing I would note is that you remember Reza Kiram. He has never been confirmed to be dead, but we know that his wife, who is currently in Al Hol camp in northeast Syria, seems to have remarried an Albanian, which suggests that Reza Kiram is indeed dead. But that would extend the Philippine extremist network to Kosovo and Albania, just to underscore how widespread this network is. So again, just in closing, the Philippines remains the regional hotspot. It continues to be a more dangerous terrorist center than anywhere else in the region. And that's the context for the development of the new law, flawed as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Sydney. Thank you for that presentation. For those who are listening in, the journalists are going to get a copy of that presentation from Sydney in a bit. We'll be sending that through our secretariat. Our next speaker, of course, would be Lieutenant General Sobejana. I believe you also have a presentation, sir.
Good afternoon once again. I don't have any presentation, but I do really appreciate the briefing of Madam Sydney Jones, our terrorism expert and political analyst. Where is it? Where is it? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear
Okay.
you.
So, well, as what I've said, I really appreciated viewing or the presentation of Madam Sydney Jones. It actually complements with our holdings here in the region. And as what I've said, I don't have any presentation, but I do believe that this discussion of ours is very important, especially the advent of the anti-terror law. We perceive that it embodies the government's genuine exertions in condemning and eradicating terrorism, not only here in the Philippines, but across the region, in Southeast Asia and in other places. So the Western Mindanao Command welcomes and succors any legitimate intent within the constitutional bounds to reach peace and development. That is our aim state, peace and development. So I may ask questions later on, or you may ask questions from me related to my function as the commander of the Western Mindanao Command that covers the Bangsamoro and the three other adjoining regions where we are confronted with all kinds of threats. You name it, we have it. We have the Abu Sayyaf group, the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters, the Dowlines family, or the ISIS-inspired group, the AKP, formerly led by I forgot the last. But we also have the New People's Army, or the communist terrorist group. So we welcome this anti-terror bill because it added teeth to our effort. It further capacitates us, and I feel the need to put an immediate end or a conclusion to the menace of terrorism and other forms of lawlessness lingering here in the area of responsibility of Western Mindanao Command. Yes, ma'am?
Yes, sir. Okay. Are you done? Are you done, sir? That is
Yes,
that
initial remarks that I wanted to share. And as we go along, I may be able to, you may want to ask some questions related to how is the situation here in my AOR is concerned.
great. Thank you so much, sir. Now we'll move quickly to questions from first members of the foreign press. Barnaby Lowe will ask the question, and then shortly after that, Jim Gomez of Associated Press and Melo Acuna. So we'd like to ask everyone to have one question and a really very brief one follow-up question so we can allow others to ask and to have the time to ask questions as well. Go ahead, Barnes.
Sydney and General Sobihana. My name is Barnaby Lowe from CBS News. My question is for Sydney, and this is a really quick question, but maybe the answer is not that quick. Because you said that the anti-terror law is necessary, flawed as it is. What do you mean it's flawed? I think people are going to be interested in the balance between necessity and the flaws of the law.
Okay. I think the first thing to say is that there isn't a single terror law anywhere in the world that has that's been completely satisfactory, and there isn't anyone that has made a perfect balance between human rights protections and what you might call repressive measures. So I think that this law replaces one of the worst anti-terror laws that was ever passed because it had so many safeguards that it was never used or almost never used. And it was particularly that personal liability provision. That said, if I look at this law, I think that there are a couple of things that jump out at me. One is that there's basically no room for rehabilitation. Anybody who gets arrested for terrorism gets put away, virtually for life. And it doesn't seem to be particularly easy to move out of that very draconian regime. So if I were the Supreme Court reviewing this law, I would try to see whether there was some way in amending the wording of this law so that it became more possible to think about rehabilitation rather than just locking people up for life. Of course, there are some qualifications and so on. The other thing I would do is, I think it was good in this law that there was a clause basically saying this law specifically is not intended to punish dissent, protest, mass action, and so on. But why then at the last minute they add another qualifier, except in that, cases where life is threatened or so and so and so and so, which raises concerns that if somebody wants to use a public order excuse, that that in fact this law could be used. So again, if the Supreme Court is reviewing this law, take out that last qualifying clause, because I think without that last clause, you've got a statement that this law will not be used for protest or dissent, which seems to be one of the big concerns of human rights organizations.
Thank you, Sydney. Maybe can we also get the General Sobejana's point of view? Because we obviously heard from him that this law is going to be helping them in the fight against terror. But are there also concerns, General, especially since something happened between the police and the military in Jolo just very recently?
Well, for us, having been fighting this war for decades already, we really need to have partners. In fact, we launched a national task force to end local armed conflict, and that mandates everyone's involvement. So we need to address the terrorism in our country in a very holistic manner. We need to do it by combining all our efforts. There should be a very good convergence. It would be a whole of the nation approach, and we really admire or welcome the wisdom of our legislators of coming up with these laws that will help us fast track the resolution of terrorism in our country. We in the armed forces of the Philippines can only do so much, because I do believe that when we kill the terrorists, our partners in the civil government, in the civilian sector, the non-government organizations, and even the media, they kill terrorism if they really wanted to do it. So if we will combine all our efforts, I think we can put a rapid conclusion to this insurgency or terrorism problem in our country and across the region.
All right, thank you, General.
Thank you. Thanks, Barnes. Jim Gomez of Associated Press.
Yeah. Good afternoon, General Sobejana and Sydney. Thank you for giving us time. My question is directed to General Sobejana, but I'm taking off from the presentation of Sydney Jones. Very specific factual questions. General Sobejana, can you tell us the quality and level of engagement of the ISIS outside the Philippines with Mindanao militant groups led by the Abu Sayyaf? And quickly, can you tell us the status and whereabouts of two important militant leaders in the south, Amin Bako, or Abu Jihad as they call it, and Hatib Hajan Sawadjaan? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jim, for asking that question. Well, before the intensity of engagement between the international or the central ISIS and our local terror groups, such as the Abu Sayyaf, and the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters, the Dawla-inspired group. But as of this time, it significantly reduces due to the neutralization or the killing of Abu Talha, one of the conduits. Of course, Amin Bako was also killed several years ago. And Hatib Sawadan, well, he is still very active, but he is quite old. And they lost Abu Talha, the conduit of the international or the central ICs. So we have not monitored a lot of a substantial amount of money coming in due to the neutralization of these personalities. So we will continue to safeguard or monitor closely the support coming from the central ISIS, and one of the things that will help us is the newly enacted law, the anti-terror law.
General, so quickly, no, I'd just like to clarify. You said that Hatib Hadjan Sawadjaan is still alive, no, very much alive. But I mean, Bako, you said was killed years ago. Was he killed in Marawi or somewhere? And
we killed him in Marawi, but the thing is, we need to get the proof of death. That's the thing that I always ask, no? The proof of death. We have not able to exhume this body for some reason. Marawi has been totally destroyed, especially the main battle area. But there's a persistent report that he was killed in that battle in Marawi. What is left right now is Hatib Sawadjaan, because Abu Talha was neutralized or killed 2 months ago in the municipality of Patikol in the island province of Sulu.
thank you, sir.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Thank you.
Melo.
Yeah, good afternoon. This goes to Sydney and to General Sobihana. Sydney, would you care to tell me the kind of partnership or working relations between Filipino terrorists and that of coming from Indonesia, Malaysia, and other countries? You mentioned as far as Kosovo. Would you care to tell us the situation today?
I think that there's an effort to purchase guns. That's one of the big ones. If you look at the Indonesians who've been arrested in Sabah over the last year and a half or so, all of them have been trying to get to Mindanao to get weapons that were purchased in 2016 and have never been brought back to Indonesia is one of them. The second thing is that in the past, there were financial links, and it was Indonesians that basically operated as the money launderers, taking money sent from Syria and sending it through to Philippine women's bank accounts in mostly in Mindanao, but there were a couple in Manila. Whether or not that is still going on, I don't know. There haven't been recent incidents that I've heard of, but that's something that can continue to take place. And there was also a very recent incident of a man, an Indonesian, who was radicalized inside a Malaysian prison in Sabah. He had been detained for immigration offenses, and an Abu Sayyaf guy who was also detained radicalized him, and we understand that the Indonesian got to the Philippines intending to work together with the man from Mindanao, only he was picked up for suspicious behavior and is now behind bars in the Philippines. But I think there is a desire to show that the effort to fight on behalf of the caliphate transcends boundaries.
Okay, thank you. For General Subihana, please. General, I've heard of a
Yes.
Filipino who was arrested somewhere in a Southeast Asian country and has remained in custody by Malaysia. Would you be able to update us if there is still truth to that information that the Filipino was detained in Malaysia?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sir Melo. I have to check on that because I have not monitored one. But as to the the laundering of money, they will do it that way. We have the anti-money laundering law monitoring bank accounts, no? Especially coming from IC's group into an individual in our country that eventually goes to the hands of the Abu Sayyaf and other terror groups here in the country.
Mm-hmm.
So we are currently checking on the new strategy that we might be adopting. If you have noticed, recently there were a series of abductions involving Indonesian fishermen working under a Malaysian employer, fishing in the tri-boundary of Malaysia and Indonesia and our country, and they were being abducted by the Abu Sayyaf. Now, we're checking on the profile of these people, but because they might be using the ransom demand or the ransom being demanded by the Abu Sayyaf as in guise of getting money coming from the international terror group. So, because it is very unusual that in the 3 series of abductions that have transpired, all the victims are Indonesians, fishermen, working under a Malaysian employer and being abducted in the tri-boundaries by the Abu Sayyaf.
Okay. So you find the relations between these people very intricate? Will it be more intricate if we had some Filipino politicians behind this?
Can I just say a word?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
I think that the person you were referring to was Muslimin Sema's son, yeah, the son of Bai Sandra, who was detained in Malaysia, but in fairly cushy conditions. I understood that he was either already back or was in the process of being brought back from Malaysia. I don't know whether that's accurate or not, but he wasn't detained in any prison and he wasn't formally acknowledged as being in custody.
Okay.
This was the young man who was linked to the Cotabato, to the Davao night market bombings.
Okay. I'm sorry, I just didn't have the name of the person. We'll have to counter check on your information, and thank you. So what about the presence of politicians in the intricate network of these terrorists, if you may?
That's for the general.
Okay.
Well, there are a lot of rumors, but based on our validation, we have not established any of our politicians here conniving with the international terror group, nor with the local terrorists. There was a time that the Abu Sayyaf was very much popular in the provinces of Basilan and Sulu. So, you know, our political system here is more of a propaganda, winning the hearts and minds of the people, getting the support. So during that time that the Abu Sayyaf was at their height, or the level of popularity is quite high, our politicians tried to ride on that popularity. And with that gesture of riding on the popularity, they were perceived as conniving with the Abu Sayyaf. So I think this is more of a strategy rather than their willingness or desire to support this terror group.
Thank you.
I think you should look at who gets a cut of the ransom money.
Okay.
Yes.
So we follow the money trail.
Yeah.
Okay. General, just to clarify and follow up on that answer of yours, are you saying that in any of your reports you have not linked any of the local politicians anywhere in Basulta with members of the Abu Sayyaf group? Because it may not be exactly what we have. For those who have covered Mindanao, this is something that we've known and understood, and have, even previous generals and commanders have already spoken about this. But are you saying in your current record as West Mincom, you do not think that, you don't think that a politician is actually involved, for example, in Sulu, in Basilan, or anywhere in Tawi-Tawi, and actually may have been helping groups when it comes to logistics and funding? I mean, are you saying now that the records of all of these politicians have been cleared?
Yes, we have not any concrete evidence linking any of the politicians here. Well, there are a lot of rumors. People are saying that the problem in Sulu, in Basilan, and even in Tawi-Tawi will not end because a lot of politicians are helping them. I'm very honest to myself with my assignment as the Joint Task Force Sulu Commander. I was really exerting effort to check on the activities of our partners in the local government, particularly the local chief executives holding elected positions. And we have not established any concrete support or helping the Abu Sayyaf group. Probably they're treating them as part of their constituents. And as their constituents, they are also voters and we have relatives as well. So they might be they're just showing their kindness, but not necessarily working for their cause. So I think that's the right, that's the description that I would like to tell you on the occasions of our local chief executives here in the Bangsamoro region, particularly in the island provinces of Basilan, Sulu, and Tawi-Tawi.
There's some last follow-up, no? What about law enforcers, for example, in Basulta areas, do you have no record of any of, local police officers involved in facilitating, aiding, rebel groups in the South? Because there were discussions that the more recent incident for officers, there were various discussions that they may have information about local players there, linking those local players to those members of the ASG they have been monitoring.
Ma'am Camela, sometimes the relationship works. Blood is thicker than water, as they say. And we could not discount the possibility that we are in talking terms with these people, and we don't know what they are talking about. But the thing is, we have the counterintelligence units monitoring our partners in the uniform service. So if they are identified to be providing aid or supporting the enemy of the state, then the consequences of verdicts is I think very harsh. So far we have not identified any among those in the active service. There are some, but they are now separated from the organization. So our counterintelligence unit are continuously doing their part, such that all or any member of the uniformed service conniving or harboring or providing aid to the enemy of the state, and even the local chief executive, we have been monitoring them because the work of our CI or counterintelligence unit is not limited to monitoring our own people. Even everybody in the government, and of course the civilians as a whole, and that's part of our intelligence operations. The civilians are involved in this case. Thank you.
Thank you, General. And next question will be coming from Regine of the Washington Post.
Yes, hello Sydney and hello po General. I'm Regine from the Washington Post. My question has to do with the anti-terror law again. No? Um, a lot of Bangsamoro and leaders from Muslim Mindanao have come forward to raise their concerns about the bill, saying that the communities were not directly consulted enough leading up to its passage in Congress. And they also raised concerns of a history of mistaken arrest or mistaken identities when it comes to pinning down certain terrorist suspects. So my question is particularly for Miss Sydney, what's your take or what's your analysis or seeing a lot of leaders coming from these communities that are directly affected by terrorism opposing this particular bill, and maybe for General Sobehana, what what do you make of their concerns now? Do these factor into or inform how the military will carry out the law? And what are the internal checks and balances po sa inyo? There. Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, I think for Muslim Mindanao, it's very clear that there is a long history of neglect, victimization, uh, uh, concern about treatment by security forces, both military and police. And I think there is every reason for these communities to be concerned about any law which allows for widespread powers of arrest. I think at the same time, it's clear that there are insufficient tools for dealing with terrorism legally in the Philippines. So if it's the case that there was insufficient consultation with the communities before the law was passed, I think one of the things that would be very high, or should be very high on the agenda of both the military and police would be to have community dialogues and to ensure that even if they didn't have sufficient consultation before the law was passed, that they go through and address very systematically concerns of the community in open forums where concerns can be aired and addressed by the people who will be involved in implementing the law.
Thank you, Sydney. What about you, General? What do
Well,
you take of what's your take, sir?
I would like to impress upon all the people participating in this forum that we in the armed forces of the Philippines, in doing our job, we are guided by the three operational imperatives. First, we do our job following the rule of law. We give due respect to human rights, and we strictly adhere the provisions of the so-called international humanitarian law. So, with the advent of the anti-terror law, this will be used as our guide, but we should be very deliberate in its implementation. I agree that there should be a consultation among the public because they really need to know what are the provisions therein. Even internally, we need to educate our people on what are the do's and don'ts. In fact, this morning we have started it already because we don't want to violate any human rights violation or laws while we implement the anti-terror law. And besides, we could not compare our armed forces before to what we have right now. I should say, with all modesty, that our armed forces today is more professional. We are more mature, and we know the reasons of our existence. That is to serve, protect our people, and defend our territory.
Thank you, sir. Sir, just one quick follow-up note. One primary concern that some lawmakers raised is that natanggal yung compensation in case a wrongful arrest is made. So the compensation was removed. So that kind of makes me wonder, sir, what would authorities be willing to do then if suddenly there is a case of a wrongful arrest? Is there
Well,
something to make up for it? Yeah.
we have legal officers in our organization. As what I've said, if it is not suited with us, we have to consult our lawyers on what should be done so that we have to speak on the provisions of the law. But based on my readings, I have not read everything in that law, but I have seen, in my opinion, that the proposed law or the law will still uphold the basic rights and fundamental liberties of our people under the 1987 Constitution as the same as the following safeguards. Like, for example, the civil and the political rights are clearly protected under Section 2 and Section 4. The custodial rights are protected also under Section 30, 31, and 33. And under Section 42, the Commission of Human Rights is still mandated to give priority to the investigation and prosecution of the violations of civil and political rights of any person. And besides, legal remedies may immediately be filed among those who have violated the law, banking on the writ of habeas corpus and the writ of amparo. So these are the provisions that I can say that the basic rights and the fundamental liberties of the people are still protected. Thank you.
Okay. Sydney, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think it's just worth noting that criminal charges can be brought against any member of the security forces who is found to have wrongly arrested someone in the course of implementing this law. So even though that really bad personal liability provision was removed, there still are provisions about bringing charges against security officers which don't exist in any other law in the region.
Okay. Thank you,
Yeah,
Sydney and General. Yes, sir.
I agree with Madam Sydney that criminal and administrative charges may be filed against erring law enforcers, and the civil indemnity may also be obtained. So I think it's fair enough for everybody.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay, next question will be from Buena of Channel News Asia.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, the president has been seen as trying to draw favor from the military, whatever intentions there are, making sure morale is high. I'm just curious, what was the reception of troops on the ground when they've learned the anti-terror law was signed? Do you have actual anecdotes of how personnel on the ground reacted, or even just on the personal level? Where were you when you learned about the approval, and how did you react?
Well, the title itself, anti-terror bill. So it supports our effort of ending terrorism. So for me, it's a welcome development. Though we really need to read the law cover to cover for us to better understand. As what I've said, it will take us some time to let everybody know the provisions of the bill so that we will not commit any mistake during the process of implementation.
Okay. Mika of
And I just have one follow-up question. Sydney mentioned that the Human Security Act is one of the worst anti-terrorism laws. I've heard similar analysis saying it's a human rights law more than it is an anti-terrorism law. So I wonder if there are concrete examples of the need for some of the evidence gathering and prolonged detention provisions of this new anti-terrorism law. Would you say, for example, Saifullah Ibrahim alias Susipto is one such example, him having been acquitted in court and later being killed in battle? Or has there been, for example, actual instance you can cite sir, when enforcers were afraid because of the penalty imposed directly on the officer, not just the state, for wrongful detentions? Are there concrete examples?
I think there are concrete examples. While the general maybe thinks of some examples, I'll have to go back and check on which ones. But one of the consequences of that law was that police turned toward using the only crimes that were non-bailable offenses, such as illegal possession of weapons. And then there were several cases of planting evidence simply because they felt that their only option was to use that provision even when the evidence wasn't there to support it. And I hope that doesn't happen with this law. You know, it's not a cure-all, and the terrorism problem here is so complicated and so entrenched that one law is not going to be the silver bullet for anything. But at least I think that this should help in trying to keep people in custody while the process of investigation can go forward without having to resort to phony charges and fake evidence.
Sir?
Well, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes.
Well, as what I've said, we have professional and matured soldiers in the armed forces of the Philippines. Well, I could not speak in behalf of the Philippine National Police, but as what I've said, if we violate human rights, if we do not follow the rule of law, now it defeats our purpose of being responsible of providing the safety and security of our people and defending the integrity of our nation. So we have to stick to that mandate. We have taken oath to serve and protect our people. And I think I don't need to go back to the three operational imperatives that I have just mentioned earlier, because it is self-explanatory. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All good, Buena. We'll now move to another question from Mika Flores of Agence France Press. Mika?
Thank you, Jam. Good afternoon, General, and good afternoon, Sydney. For Sydney, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that the anti-terror law is not a cure-all to solve the problems of terrorism in the country. So what, in your view, are the necessary tools that we still need in order for us to solve the terror problem? And to General Sobihana, we are in the middle of a pandemic, and yet the problems of terrorism in the country still remain. So how are you going to appease fears on the ground that this new law, which empowers the military to go after suspected enemies of the state, will not further marginalize those who are already in the margins?
Should I start?
Yes, please.
I think one of the things to keep very much front and center is the need for BARM to succeed. Because one of the things you need to avoid if you're going to protect the country against terrorism is the idea of disgruntled fighters from one organization leaving to join a more militant organization because they didn't get what they thought they were promised the first time round. And there have been several cycles of this taking place in the Philippines. It's one of the consequences of having so many insurgencies and so many different armed groups that one can provide an alternative for the other. So just make sure that the process of normalization and decommissioning and so on goes forward the way it's supposed to. I think it's really important to ensure that adequate resources flow from the center and so on. But the success of BARM is absolutely critical. That's only one of many, many factors, but I think it's important to highlight that.
Can I give
Yes,
the
sir.
answer to that question? Well, I have to answer the question one by one. First is the pandemic. With the coronavirus in our midst, everybody knows that the armed forces is one of the frontliners, actively supporting the local government units in our fight against the spread of the virus. So roughly 40 to 50% of our manpower are given the tasks of supporting the civil government, the local government in its fight against COVID-19. So with this reduction, we reduce our people running after the terror group. And I think the issuance of anti-terror bill is a good addition or an additional piece on our part to really put an end to the meanings of terrorism. Because the provisions therein allows us or makes us or provide us legal authority on how to deal with the things ahead of us without losing sight to our pre-operational imperative, that is respect of human rights, doing it in accordance with the rule of law and others. So and on on your question on whether or not we will further marginalize those who are already marginalized. You know, we are not selective in providing public service. We treat everybody of equal importance. And I think the intention of the law is to separate the good ones with the bad ones. So we will insulate and provide protection to the good ones, and we will be running after the bad ones in a very relentless and sustained manner, so that they cannot be of existence anymore, and we will be able to eradicate all these terrorist members, so that we can invite people who wanted to start economic activity here in the region and across our archipelago.
Great. Thank you. So before we move to questions from the local press, we're nearing the end of our session today. I'd like to ask one more question in behalf of a member of Focap. This is for General Sobejana. Sir, the question is, aside from defunding the terrorist network and resorting to military means, what other effective measures are you taking to defend terrorism and curb the radicalization in many Muslim communities? Because there's always this fear, and as always, there's been many studies that heavy militarized areas, militarization actually tend to create this social situation where, you know, a lot of children are not able to go to school, and in the end, you know, it perpetuates social injustice, which has long been seen as one of the leading causes of radicalization in the southern Philippines. So aside from this militarized approach, what other approaches are you working on? And do you think that's going to actually make a difference given the time frame that you've given in terms of deadlines and trying to finish the job, like you said, within your term or by 2022?
Thank you, Ma'am Jamela. We have been fighting various threats for several decades already, more than 5 decades. since 1968. And I should say that military action is not the ultimate solution to this security concerns of ours. I think operations other than war would be a sustainable solution, meaning it requires active involvement of our partners in the civil government. We've been receiving people returning to the folds of the law from their respective terror organizations, and they are in unison in telling us that the reason why they joined the terror group because of economic problem. They are raising their family, children, without earning anything for a living. So it would be the big dishonor in his part if you are the head of the family and your family members died of hunger, sickness, and others, and you have not done anything at all because you don't have nothing for them. So people who were recruited, being offered with small amount, given a rifle or a pistol, should be grabbed that offer because it's an opportunity for them to get certain amount for their respective families. So I think if we can come up with a good economic program and let everybody earn for a living by providing them employment or livelihood, I think nobody dares to join the terror group or any lawless organizations for that matter.
Anyone from local media would like to ask a question? So far, okay. All right. David Santos from CNN Philippines has a question. And shortly after that, it will be JC Gotinga from RAC.
I would like to ask Ms. Sydney Jones, maybe can you give us an idea how this global pandemic is also affecting in any way the operations of the radical and terror groups in the South? Is it working for their advantage, or also they are also affected in terms of their logistics and their operation? And a follow-up question would be, our security forces are addressing many security issues, facing issues on many security fronts, may it be insurgency in the country, and then territorial defense, and then now helping out the government addressing the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you give us an assessment on how much our security forces is addressing the problem of radicalism in the South? Are you satisfied with it? Is there anything more that they can do in terms of finding a way to stop it, especially in our borders, in our southern borders? Thank you.
It's interesting on the COVID-19. We've been trying to look at whether there is an impact among the extremist groups. I think it's clear that there's a narrative that has circulated widely around the globe that COVID-19 is divine retribution, first for the Chinese treatment of the Uyghurs. That's how it started in January and February. And then as COVID spread into Europe in particular, and then to the US and elsewhere, it was divine retribution for the actions of the West. And a corollary of that was, now is the time to strike because the enemy is weak. So there was maybe an enhanced inspiration given by COVID, even as ISIS was warning its own fighters about taking precautions to avoid the virus and not traveling to virus-hit areas, including those in Europe. So in that sense, there may have been some impact, but there doesn't seem to have been any other direct impact of COVID on the extremist groups themselves. I think there was some concern that some of the tasks, ability to move around for field operations, but given the level of activity of the armed forces that the general has been involved with in both Sulu Basilan and Central Mindanao, doesn't seem like it's put too much of a crimp in the armed forces style. In terms of other measures that the military can undertake, I actually believe very deeply that airstrikes only end up further alienating a civilian population if they result in either widespread civilian deaths or widespread displacement, and that therefore the emphasis should be not on using airstrikes as a way to eradicate the enemy, but trying to, as much as possible, use intelligence information, and as I say, you open the possibility of rehabilitation. So I hope rely more on intelligence, on airstrikes and active measures by the armed forces that can serve to deepen this narrative in the Muslim South about abuse by security forces.
Would you like to say something, to add something, General?
Well, in everything we do, we always do it in a very deliberate manner. We always employ the reasonable amount of we have in our arsenal the capabilities, so we make use of them vis-a-vis the amount of target that we wanted to destroy. So, and one of our consideration is the safety and security of the people nearby. We don't want collateral damage. So the safety of the public is number one concerns of ours in doing our job. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Now we move to the last question. I think last question will be coming from JC Gutinga. JC.
Thank you, Jam. A question for the General. Sir, I think when we say terrorist or terrorism, the stereotypical image would be the jihadist or the extremist, the Islamist extremist fighter. But then also this law broadens the definition to include anyone who may be perceived as posing a threat to the public or to the government. And also it touches on the communist insurgency. So, sir, I think one of the worries is that if there is an order or if there is an impetus from the executive to go after certain dissenters, critics who may or may not necessarily be, the stereotypical definition of a terrorist, does the military, sir, have a way of putting its foot down or distinguishing, or is there anything in the law that allows the military to say, no, we don't think this person or this group is a terrorist, especially if you're up against cabinet officers giving you orders from above? And then for Ms. Sydney Jones, my question related to that is, we're seeing the security law in Hong Kong. You're familiar with other anti-terror laws in different countries. Have these been used to stifle dissent or to go after critics of the establishment? Thank you.
Well, JC, thank you for that question. Our commander-in-chief is the president, and we have the chain of command. The commander-in-chief being on the top and down the line to our detachments. So this anti-terror law will serve as our guide. As what I've said, we will implement this in a very deliberate manner. For us to be sure that we are doing the right thing, we need to cascade the provisions therein to all our people. So we will allocate really time for us to learn the provisions of the new law and make sure that we will not lose sight to the three operational guidelines or imperatives that we are following. And that is, again, I have to say it, we do our job following the rule of law with all due respect to human rights and with strict adherence to the provisions of the international humanitarian law. So that I can say on your questions, Jesse.
Hi, JC. With regard to the questions about other laws and how they've been used, certainly in the countries of Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, there isn't. I can't think of specific cases where the terrorism law has been misused to arrest dissidents or protesters. I think Hong Kong is a real serious question now. But also, I think that there are, unfortunately, lots of other ways in the Philippines and elsewhere that you can go after everyone from crusading journalists to political dissidents using defamation laws, for example, using laws on electronic information. And those, in some ways, have become more dangerous tools for stifling dissent than terrorism laws.
Thank you po.
Thank you. Now we're about to close. I'd just like to ask our speakers if they have, they would like to share as a closing message, perhaps before we close this forum. Ms. Sydney Jones, would you like to say something again? I mean, anything that we've missed out so far?
Yeah, I think the only thing just to underscore is that it would be really important and in everyone's interest that this law gets thoroughly evaluated after it's been vetted by the Supreme Court and also in force for about a year, just to see how it's being used and if there have been some of the abuses that have been feared. Then there might be room for a corrective, or if it hasn't been abused, then it might be time just to reassess what else could be done to try and press forward the search for other tools to deal with terrorism. But it was important, I think, to get something to replace the Human Security Act. And I think it will be very important to see how the Supreme Court reacts to these petitions.
General, do you agree with the suggestion that there is a need to you the current anti-terror law and to check our example?
Well, in every campaign, it's time bound. After that period of time has been used up, we are sitting together and do some assessment because time changes. So for us, at this point in time, the anti-terror bill is very timely. Its issuance, the situation demands for it. So I agree that there should be a reassessment after a certain period of time of its implementation. And if I may, to end this security threat, there's really a need to intensify our military operations and engage in peaceful mechanism through the intercession of the people and the convergence of the different sectors. we need to have a very good convergence because this holistic approach is, I think, an effective way to defeat terrorism not only here in Mindanao and in the Bangsamoro region, but across our nation and across the archipelago. The anti-terror law reinforces our campaign against terrorism and insurgency as it encompasses mechanisms in addressing the root causes of terrorism. As I mentioned earlier, we created the National Task Force to end the local armed conflict, and it mandates the involvement of each and every one. So we are of the view that the anti-terror law upholds the basic rights and the fundamental liberties of our people, as what I've said, under the Constitution, and it is clothed with the necessary safeguards to prevent abuses in its implementation, while equipping the military and the other law enforcers the legal tools to protect the people and the rights of the accused. Thank you very much, Gamela and the rest of the participants.
Thank you, General. That sounds very promising indeed. We hope to have you again in the coming months, possibly for another discussion on the impact of the anti-terror law. Ms. Jones, thank you once again for joining us. As always, it's always a pleasure, and it's always packed when you are our guest here. The last time was shortly after the war in Marawi. Thank you to our speakers, to those who tuned in. We hope to hear from you again. I think next week we're going to have a forum with a representative of the World Health Organization. Thank you very much. Stay safe, everyone. Stay vigilant and stay healthy. Thank you po at magandang tanghali.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, ma'am. Thank you po. Salamat.
Salamat.